Meghan Markle has just been blacklisted again. According to words on the street, Dior wasn't dressing Meghan Markle. Not now, not later, not ever. And this wasn't a mistake, wasn't a scheduling issue, and wasn't a simple creative difference. It was a block, a firm, deliberate, do not contact kind of block. And the reason behind that silent door closing, a trail that leads back through years of confusion, missing items, quiet warnings, and one single dress that refused to stay hidden. Yes, you heard me, a dress allegedly went missing. But let me go back to the very beginning of this story so you understand me much better. It all began with a soft green designer dress worn by Meghan during a Variety magazine shoot. This dress was loaned, not gifted, not purchased. It was borrowed for a few hours, as is completely normal in editorial fashion. But when the photo shoot ended, the dress didn't go back to the fashion house. It didn't arrive with the rest of the returned items. It simply vanished. No paperwork, no explanation, just gone. The story probably would have faded into the shadows forever until 3 years later Meghan walked out wearing that exact same green dress. Fashion insiders froze. Designers recognized it immediately. Wardrobe coordinators who had been there that day remembered the bag that came back lighter than it should have. That dress became a living receipt, proof of a whisper that suddenly grew teeth. A tiny incident from years ago exploded into the spotlight, forcing the industry to revisit every uncomfortable rumor they had brushed aside. It wasn't just a dress anymore. It was the beginning of a much larger story. Once that dress reappeared, people who had stayed quiet began connecting their own memories. The missing gowns after shoots, the items that were loaned but never returned, the wardrobe coordinators who noticed pieces disappearing from garment racks, the stylists who began refusing to lend anything with real value, the brand managers who quietly stopped replying to her team's requests. None of these incidents were big enough alone. A missing necklace here, an unreturned pair of shoes there. A dress that didn't come back after an event. But together they painted a picture no one wanted to look at. Designers felt uneasy. Assistants warned each other. Some labels began placing small notes on internal lists. Do not loan. Risk of loss. It became clear to many that the green dress wasn't the beginning of the story. It was the moment everything clicked. A pattern they had tried to ignore suddenly stood in front of them, undeniable. And as the fashion world pieced together the past, the trail didn't lead to Paris or London or Los Angeles. It led somewhere much earlier, somewhere far from royal palaces or luxury runways. It led straight back to Toronto. Before the palace gates, before the headlines and documentaries, before the million-dollar wardrobe budgets, there was a basic commercial shoot in Toronto. No red carpets, no worldwide attention. Just a simple set for Reitmans, a clothing brand Meghan worked with early in her career. People who were there still remember how she walked in, confident, friendly, charismatic, the kind of presence that fills a room without trying. The shoot itself went smoothly, cameras flashed, outfits were swapped, assistants hustled from one rack to the next. It was the kind of day fashion teams barely remember because nothing dramatic usually happens, but something did happen that day. Not loudly, not immediately. Only when the shoot wrapped and the team began checking items back in did things start to feel off. A few dresses weren't where they were supposed to be, a bundle of clothing seemed to be missing, and one specific pair of Aquazura Very Matilda heels, the exact pair Meghan wore during the shoot, were nowhere to be found. At first, nobody assumed the worst. Mistakes happen all the time, assistants pack too quickly, items get mixed with personal bags, wardrobe pieces accidentally go home with the wrong person. It happens, so they let it go. Until months later, the world watched as Meghan Markle appeared for her royal engagement announcement, smiling, glowing, beginning the next chapter of her life. But fashion insiders noticed something else. On her feet were those same Aquazura heels. The missing ones. When the question was raised quietly behind the scenes, Meghan allegedly gave a simple explanation. She didn't want items she had worn ending up on eBay. She said she was too famous for that. Some people accepted that explanation. Others didn't, but in the fashion world, that moment became a private warning, a message passed from stylist to stylist. Be careful, things go missing. This was the first crack in the timeline. No palaces, no cameras, just a small, quiet pattern beginning to form. Years later, Meghan entered a new world, Kensington Palace, a world built on rules so old that breaking one can shake institutions. And one of those rules carved deep into royal protocol is simple. Nothing is free, not clothes, not shoes, not jewelry, not even a pair of earrings handed to you backstage. Every item must be purchased, logged, recorded, and archived. The reason is simple: accepting gifts could be seen as favoritism or bribery. Royals must remain neutral. Their clothing cannot be used as a negotiation tool for designers hoping for publicity. But according to palace staff and sources familiar with what happened behind those walls, Meghan arrived with a very different understanding, a Hollywood understanding. In Hollywood, wearing a designer's clothing is the favor. Being seen in a gown is payment. Brands compete for the chance. But that system simply does not exist inside royalty. When aides explained the rules, they expected surprise, maybe confusion. Instead, they allegedly met frustration. Meghan reportedly pushed back, insisting exceptions had been made for her and more could be made again. The palace saw it differently. To them it wasn't personal, it was protocol. To her, according to insiders, it felt restrictive and outdated. And as the requests for gifted clothes continued, palace staff began to grow uneasy. It wasn't the cost they worried about, it was the mismatch between centuries of royal structure and the habits Meghan brought with her from the entertainment world. Small disagreements soon grew into a larger concern. This wasn't confusion, it was a pattern. When Meghan officially became a working royal, there was a long-established system in place. Prince Charles, as the Prince of Wales, funded the wardrobes of his sons' wives for official duties. It wasn't about fashion, it was about presenting the monarchy properly during public work. For years, the numbers were predictable. Princess Catherine, for example, averaged around £100,000 for an entire year. That included state dinners, charity visits, international tours, and hundreds of engagements. But when Meghan's wardrobe spending began, palace accountants couldn't believe what they were seeing. The numbers climbed at a speed no one expected. Hundreds of thousands, then approaching £1 million in a single year with fewer engagements than Catherine. Designers reached out wondering when certain items would be returned. Invoices piled up for pieces worn once and never again. Items disappeared from the record without explanation. Finally, Prince Charles stepped in, not to reprimand but to clarify. He attempted a gentle conversation about expectations, about spending limits, about the structure that every royal woman before her had followed. But sources say Meghan didn't take the conversation the way it was intended. She reportedly felt singled out, she felt judged, she felt controlled. And that moment became the turning point, the widening of a gap between Meghan and the institution she had married into. A wardrobe issue became a personal one. A misunderstanding became a fracture, and as the palace struggled behind closed doors, the fashion world outside was beginning to make its own decisions that would eventually lead to Dior closing its doors completely. By this point in the story, viewers naturally asked the same question. Why? Why would someone with a multi-million-dollar home, global fame, and major media deals risk their reputation over clothing? Why not simply buy the pieces? Why walk away with items that weren't hers? Sources who watch the pattern closely say the answer isn't about money, it's about mindset. Hollywood operates like a different planet. When you're rising in that world, wearing a designer's clothing is the transaction. Designers chase you, not the other way around. If you return something late, no one complains. If you keep something accidentally or intentionally, it's often brushed off as the cost of doing business with a star. And according to insiders, Meghan carried that mindset into every room she entered. That wearing a piece was enough. That her image was payment. That rules were flexible if fame was involved. But this attitude clashed with everything around her. With royal protocol, with designer expectations, with industry etiquette. It created friction where none needed to exist. It turned simple loaning agreements into complicated situations. It wasn't about the dress, it wasn't about the shoes, it wasn't even about Dior. It was about the belief that her presence alone changed the rules. Once people understood that, they stopped trying to make sense of the missing pieces. They saw the pattern not as mistakes but as a behavior, one that followed her from Toronto to Hollywood to Kensington Palace. In the end, the story comes back to where it began. A single green gown. A dress that disappeared quietly, traveled through time, resurfaced unexpectedly, and exposed a trail that had been forming for years. It wasn't the most expensive dress she ever wore. It wasn't tied to a royal event. It wasn't even particularly dramatic on camera, but it became the symbol of something bigger. The moment the fashion world could no longer pretend the whispers were just whispers. And when Dior made its silent decision, the industry understood exactly what it meant. A door had closed, not with anger but with finality. Because in luxury fashion, silence is louder than any headline. A brand like Dior doesn't step away unless it believes the story behind the scenes is heavier than the glamour.